Hello everyone, and welcome to my guide on getting a low sub-50 turn count on Refraction Railway 3. Spoiler alert, it's Rupture. As of writing this script, the current lowest turn count I can find is 35 turns by FairImpress4022 on Reddit. They have a pretty decent guide on getting that low turn count, and while I personally didn't follow it, I'll still link it in the description in case any of you are interested in following it instead. Anyways, let's get started. The first fight is against the Mermaids, and honestly, these fights are the most unoptimized portion of the run. You can relatively easily shave them down to 4 turns if you're willing to take a little bit longer on the other fights. I did not choose to do that, however, and instead, the goal of this fight was to generate enough ego resources to use Blind Obsession, Sun Shower, and any 3 attack weight ego for the Slitcurrent fight. This requires around 25 ego resources, which results in a minimum of 5 turns. You can cut this down to 4 turns if you're really optimal, but usually it's not really worth it. The Slitcurrent is a fight where I do not recommend doing what I actually did. I was aiming for a 2-turn run, which is what I got, but in doing so, my team was not exactly the best for the next Gossypium fight. I'd recommend just running the typical Rupture team instead, and you can easily get both of these fights done in 3 turns. Now, in case you do want to do a 2-turn Slitcurrent instead, because it is still pretty impressive, this is how I did it. First turn, you need to use Telepole on Dawn, Blind Obsession, and Sun Shower. Make sure Dawn is moving before one of the other egos, otherwise she won't get it off. The hardest part of doing this is making sure you have skill 3 on every character, except maybe Yi-Song. But more importantly, Dawn and Ishmael specifically cannot have their skill 3 in the bottom slot, otherwise their ego overwrites it. After that, it's down to pure RNG once again. You need Rabbit Heathcliff to roll max speed, obviously, and just dump all of your skill 3s into the fluorescent part. It will be more than enough to kill, even if you get suboptimal RNG like I did, with there only being 1 fluorescent part instead of 2. So Sync Association Sinclair can't apply any fragile. The next fight is against the Gossypium, and like I already said, Rupture is the best. You can easily get 3 turns on this guy, no problem, but unfortunately the team I was using is very unoptimal, and while technically speaking it could be done in 3 turns, you need near perfect RNG with every character having both skill 2s and their skill 3, not to mention speed RNG with Rabbit and Sinclair. Even getting 4 turns is difficult with this team, and I couldn't be bothered to reset for an entire day, so I just settled for 5 turns. Now, the next few fights, I can start talking about the main Rupture team that you should be using for most of the fights. The team you should be using is Lantern Dawn, 7 Faust, and Otis, W Yi-Song, either 7 Heathcliff or Rose Spanner Gregor, and of course the main staple of any Rupture team, Talisman Sinclair. Rose Spanner Gregor is typically better than 7 Heathcliff, since his AEDD ego applies Spark Discharge, which is one of, if not the best source of Rupture count in the game. These next 3 fights you basically have 2 options. Either a full Rupture team for a total of 9 turns, as well as being a lot more consistent, or you can do what I did and use Sinking for the Ardor Moth, giving an 8-turn total, as well as having it be a lot tighter of a run. The reason why I recommend using Rupture instead is because of AEDD. As long as Sinclair gets his speed tiers right and you are able to apply it, it's super consistent. However, if you are using a sinking team for the Moth, you cannot use AEDD in any of the previous fights, as you will not have enough Gloom resources otherwise. You may be able to squeeze out enough resources to be able to use it in one of the other fights, but it's not really worth it, since you do still need even more Gloom for the Ahab fight specifically. So with that said, let's go over the very consistent Rupture strategy. You need to reset until you get Skill 2 and Skill 3 on Sinclair. Use Skill 2 turn 1 and hope that he rolls max speed turn 2. If he does, great, you get 3 turns. If he doesn't, oh well, you get 4 turns instead, or reset. The other Sinner skills don't really matter for turn 1. Just make sure you don't use any skills that apply Rupture count, and if Gregor rolled low speed, you can use AEDD here. Turn 2, Sinclair should roll fastest, and then you can target down the enemy with as many Rupture count skills as possible, or Gloom skills if you used AEDD. For the Pearl specifically, you want to target the shell to avoid as much damage as possible. The only reason I didn't is because I wasn't sure about how much damage I was going to be doing, and targeted the Pearl just to be safe. But in doing so, I had 2 unused skills, which means I could have done an extra 500 damage that would have been more than enough even if I targeted the shell. The next fight, the Skin Prophet, we have the same team, same strategy, same everything. You could break the candles if you use Fluid Sac on Faust, but I don't think it's worth it. Not only will you consume a ton of Gloom by doing so, you'll also need to use AEDD afterwards, otherwise you risk killing the Rupture stack way too early. The reason this is unviable is because most of the skills that don't apply Rupture count are nowhere near enough to actually break the candles, and so without AEDD the RNG becomes unbearable. The best thing to do is ignore the candles and target down the Prophet himself. I'd recommend replacing Faust with 7 Heathcliff here, since she has 0 count application when she can't clash. And so if you don't get lucky like I did and have her rolling minimum speed all the time, she can and will break your stack. The DPS in this fight is quite precise when ignoring the candles, and as such, if everyone is not at least applying neutral count, the stack will die.
방금 건 아무 쓸모도 없었어. 바보. 여기다가 말하면 녹음되는 건가요? 아, 힘내세요. 잘근잘근 씹어버리겠네. 더 이상 얻을 수 없는 부위가 조각났어. 계속해도 돼.
The Ardor Moth can easily be brute forced by Rupture Team, though if you did take too much damage in the previous fights, it can end up being a little bit tricky. Since the Moth is fatal to Gloom damage, I decided to use a sinking team instead. Of course, since I used W Yi Song in the previous fights, I can't use the staple Spice Bush in this one, and while it does make the fight easier, it isn't necessary. The team we are using is pretty straightforward. We have the 3 sinking units that we can actually use, Boatworks Ishmael, Daichi Rodion, and Daichi Honglu. The next 3 may seem a little strange at first, but they all serve a very specific purpose. First we have Rose Spanner Gregor. Quite literally, the only reason he's here is for Tremor application with his skill 2, so he can activate Ishmael's passive. And having a Gloom skill 3 is also a nice bonus. Next we have Sunshower Heathcliff. He's here for his counter and skill 2. The skill 2 having 4 coins means he can trigger the sinking stack a lot, and the counter means his speed is actually the Moth's for turn 1.
부위 하나가 끊어졌네요. 이제 좀 수월해지겠어요.
And finally, we have LCB Mersault. He will always be moving last and has a 4-coin gloom skill, which makes him probably the best unit to have to round out this team. Pretty much the turn order we got here is 100% perfect. Gregor's skill 2 into Rhymeshank into Ishmael's skill 2 and Honglu's skill 2. Skill 3 for Ishmael would be better since I would be able to use a second Rhymeshank, but that would only apply if Rodion moved first the next turn. Otherwise, if the turn order is the same as what we got, it would actually end up doing less damage, and simply put, would not be enough to actually defeat the Moth in 2 turns.
쓰레기 딱콩 한 방 먹였어. 무얼 잘못했는지 아는 것부터가 시작이랬어.
The second mermaid fight is, without a doubt, the most unoptimized part of the run. Its whole purpose is to be able to generate enough resources to use Ego in the next 2 fights. The only realistic way to make this fight any faster is to be a lot more selective and precise about what Ego and skills you use in the previous fights, and is one of the main reasons I never used AEDD. Basically, the resources you need to have for the next 2 fights to go pretty quickly is 10 Wrath, 4 Lust, 20 Sloth, 25 Gluttony, 20 Gloom, 23 Pride, and 16 Envy. You can miss a few of these if you are confident you can make it back during the fights, but unless you are really optimal with your resource managements up until this point, the mermaid fight will take around 8 to 10 turns. Next, we have the infamous Ahab Trio, which is honestly one of the easiest fights in the run so long as you do this very specific strategy and nothing else. What is this strategy, you ask? Well, simply put, Ego spam the video game. The team you'll want to use is Spicebush Yi-Song, Rabbit Heathcliff, W Dawn, Sync Association Sinclair, preferably 7 Otis, but Magic Bullet works too, and either Captain or Boatworks Ishmael. Captain Ishmael is better for both Ahab fights, but makes the first turn of this fight a lot more precise, specifically because she needs to be moving last turn 1, so she can do the finishing blow on most of the enemies and not have her sanity get absolutely obliterated. For the first turn, you need to use Sun Shower, Ebony Stem, and Blind Obsession. As long as Yi-Song rolls heads, it will kill all of the enemies. Turn 2 is where the fight actually starts. The only reason these Ahab fights are capable of being done so quickly is entirely because of Yi-Song's Dimension Shredder Ego. You'll want to 100% fully target down Ahab with everyone. The more skill 2s you can use this turn, the better, especially if they're Pearson Pride. You'll want to overclock Dimension Shredder anytime it targets Ahab since it does way more damage, otherwise the regular version is just fine. You'll also want to use Ebony Stem a second time here, clashing with Queequeg's 3-coin skill, just to negate some damage. And if you don't have anything better for Ishmael to do, overclock Blind Obsession to get that nice Pride Fragility. Thanks to the protection from Sun Shower, you don't have to worry about damage at all this turn, so you can completely ignore Starbuck, and no one should be staggered.
칼날이 잘 드네요. 아마 그 공격이 약점이었겠죠? 앞으로 강력한 공격이 다가올 것 같아. 미리 말을 해줬으니까.
As long as you have 10 charge on Dawn and Heathcliff rolls max speed, The next turn is just an easy GG. All you have to do is dump all of your skill 3s and Dimension Shredder into Ahab and she'll go down no problem. If you aren't using Captain Ishmael, you'll probably need to use Blind Obsession here too.
무얼 잘못했는지 아는 것부터가 시작이랬어.
이미 도달했다.
이 작살엔 필살의 집념이 담겨 있지. 다음은 어디요?
The next fight is the true final boss of the run, and one that really shows off how good Dimension Shredder actually is. This is a fight where you really have to think on your feet. There's no real strategy other than spam Dimension Shredder and get kind of lucky. The first phase is the easiest, using 2 Dimension Shredders is enough to beat it in 2 turns, though I was playing extra conservative for this fight and as a result the first phase took me 3 instead. Phase 2 is just as simple. Clash with all of her skills and keep spamming Dimension Shredders. It's best to use at least one of your skill 3s of W, Dawn, or Ryoshu here to just get a little bit of extra damage. Due to the protection, it is very difficult to get under 3 turns in this phase, but once she's staggered, it's pretty easy to defeat her. Phase 3 is the hardest part of the fight, when playing normally, but if you play it like me and save all of your big nuke skills for right now, it's the easiest. Even more D-Shredder spam and getting lucky with Heathcliff's speed means an easy one-turn Phase 3. And with that, there's only a single fight left. So what's better than old reliable Rupture to finish the job? With the Ahab fights behind us, we are no longer restricted in playing conservatively and can freely use egos with no fear or consequences. This means we can easily use Gregor's AEDD for the freest fight ever. We do the typical Rupture stuff, gaining Talisman on Sinclair while using skills that don't matter on everyone else, applying AEDD to the hands and using Fluid Sac to clash with the Grasp skill, and next turn Sinclair goes first, meaning we have a win.
이 전투는 승리할 거야. 앞으로 강력한 공격이 다가올 것 같아.
With AEDD and every single one of our identities having a Gloom skill, means there's no chance the stack could ever die.
방금 건 제대로 된 공격이 아니었는데. 혹시 너희들 중에 매뉴얼을 제대로 안 읽고 온 사람들이 있는 걸까?
이봐, 버틸 자신 있어?
표적 확인.
단테님.
Turn 3, I believe we do get lucky with LCCB Ishmael rolling high speed. According to my math, the amount of damage we do from the Rupture stack alone this turn is around 1,300-ish, meaning we are still missing around 500 damage to actually beat it this turn. If Ishmael didn't roll high speed to apply the 5 fragile, I do not believe I would have had enough DPS to beat it in 3 turns. But as they say, luck is a skill, and while I may not be the luckiest person in the world, I am certainly lucky enough to get a sub 45. Will I ever try to get a sub 40? Absolutely not. I don't want to do this again. Getting a low turn count one time is more than enough for a single person, and unless you're either a masochist or have a metric ton of free time on your hands, I would never recommend trying to get anything below 40. Anyways, that's about all from me for now. If you enjoyed the video or if it helped you get a lower turn count, give the video a like and maybe even subscribe if you feel like it. More content is coming. I swear, having there be like a week since my last upload is totally 100% intentional and not because I forgot about this at all. Nope. Anyways, goodbye.